And welcome to Conscious Living Radio, 100.5 FM in Vancouver, Co-op Radio on Wednesday nights, 6 to 7 p.m. Also available as a podcast on consciouslivingradio.org after the fact, and on our YouTube channel, and right now, Facebook Live. So welcome, everybody. I'm Tasha Simms. Hey,
and
Mark.
I'm Mark Cron.
And today our guest, they started a conscious PR firm at the age of 25. They published poetry, authored a few books. The Only Public Relations Guide You'll Ever Need is one of them, and also vegan marketing success stories. She herself went vegan in 2018 and is now a content writer, editor for vegan businesses, helping vegan and spiritual nonfiction writers empower others to make meaningful decisions, marketing decisions, as well, that help make the world a better place. Her name is Sandra Nomoto. She's a self-proclaimed self-development spiritual junkie who advocates for the vegan lifestyle. Welcome to the show, Sandra.
Thanks so much, Tasha and Mark. What a pleasure to be here.
So I know you believe, I did a little reading up on you, and I know you believe we're all connected. We're here not only to be our best selves, but stewards for our planet. So let's get personal. Let's start that way. Tell us how you came to that realization and how that belief fuels your mission.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call myself a sustainability or climate advocate. Although, I mean, when I learned about reasons to recycle in the second grade, that really stuck with me. And you know, now I'm 40 and I see the result of, you know, decades of our actions, you know, one natural disaster after the next, and so many issues related to sustainability. And so I think it's one of those issues that has been a part of me my whole life, you know, has never really made its way into my professional work. Although I have worked with some folks in that area when I did run Conscious PR. But yeah, I would say, that's been a big part of my life. And then especially being a vegan for 4.5 years now, and knowing that animal agriculture has such a huge environmental impact on our planet, it's a no-brainer for me now. And it's, you know, whether you're vegan, wherever you are on that plant-based spectrum, you can't deny it. It's animal ag. It's just one of those huge causes. And so, that just for me fuels my reason to be vegan even more.
And your recent book, which is focused on business owners who are vegan entrepreneurs, are the marketing strategies much different than they would be for someone who's not looking at things like sustainability and ethics? Is the approach itself different?
That's a great question. I've been asked that several times. The tactics, the tools, the strategies that vegan businesses are using are absolutely not any different than any conventional business. And that's what's great about this book. I should clarify, not all of the founders or marketers who submitted case studies for the book, or who I used as examples, they're not necessarily vegan themselves. When I say vegan businesses, I just mean that the businesses are animal free. So I know that's sort of my predecessor, Katrina Fox. So she wrote the very first vegan business book in the world in 2016. That was a decision she made very consciously. All of the contributors to her book are vegan, but I didn't want to do that with my book, just because I wanted to really focus on the marketing case studies. So I didn't want, you know, if your CEO or the marketer isn't vegan, I didn't want that to be a barrier. I just wanted to really focus in on the marketing stories. So all of the businesses in the book are vegan.
So can you do a little bit more there? Because it's a bit confusing to me listening to this. So they're not necessarily, what does it mean to be a vegan business? Like, are they people who are looking at, is there that idealistic understanding, like in your mission statement, of your business contributing to the planet? So maybe they're not vegan, but they have an awareness that they're sustainable. They're not using animals for cruelty testing, or like, is that what you mean, that they're ethical? What was your criteria to pick these businesses that you worked with?
So the businesses have products that are completely animal free. So the products are vegan themselves, or if they have services, the services are in no way related to animals or animal cruelty. And in most in most cases, the service provider like myself are vegan and living a vegan lifestyle. And sorry, to answer the second part of your other question, the only difference that I have found with vegan businesses is that they have to decide how much education around veganism, and that may or may not include sustainability, that they want to include in their marketing messages. So for some of the very obvious, let's say, meat alternative companies or fashion companies that are not using leather, fur, etc. For them, the messaging around veganism is going to be a lot stronger, because if you're not eating meat, here's our product, right? And so it's going to be probably like at least half of the messaging is going to be somewhere around that. Whereas for companies like, for example, Midday Squares, their products are plant-based. That is as far as they go in terms of their messaging. Like they're not pushing the vegan message at all. And so for some companies, it's as simple as that. And because they're catering to omnivores and they don't want to scare off omnivores with the potential vegan message. So that's what I found. It's everybody's using the exact same tools. The only difference with a vegan business is it depends how much of that pro-vegan message they want to include in their messaging and their marketing.
I was so hoping for a different answer.
I know, right?
Because I'm not a person who relates to marketing. I'm one of those idealists who is not driven by money, but driven by making change in the world. And so I really was hoping that there was some way to bridge the gap between, because it's also obviously you have to make money, to ask you, is there even such a thing as ethical capitalism, and what would that look like? And I was hoping some of your strategies would actually touch on ways to both make money, but consider the planet, consider other human beings, consider the impact on everyone. In other words, conscious business is a term that whether it's vegan or anything else, there's a greater awareness than just I've got the lucrative piece down and there's money going into my pocket. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, being vegan for 4.5 years now, and only recently being very, I would say, a lot more networked in the last few years since I started my business as the content doctor 2.5 years ago. I've now been rolling in these vegan business circles, and what I can tell you is that these folks get it. If you're the ones who are vegan founded and who are using their business to try and veganize the world, they get it. They like innately they understand that animal ag impact on sustainability. It may or may not be a big part of their messaging. They understand the ethics behind minorities, the people of color who are involved in these industries, and the impact on these communities. Like when you become vegan, you might go through one door and it's like, I'm doing it for the animals. But once you start going through this, sorry pun, for this pun, but rabbit hole, you just start opening more doors in terms of why veganism is such a great lifestyle to pursue, because it alleviates health problems. So some of the, our most pressing chronic diseases, diabetes, cancer, heart disease, these are all can be either reduced or eliminated with a plant-based diet. Mainstream media often does not talk about that. And then, of course, we've talked about the environment, social injustice, poverty. I mean, 800 million people in the world are still without food and water every day. And here we are giving those resources to animals that we raise for food instead of the humans. And so it's just, it's this snowball of reasons. And so I can tell you that the folks that, I've been networking with online from all around the world who are vegan, are using all of that in their arsenal, so to speak, in their vegan businesses. Now, my book is a different story because it includes very different, like I said, not all of the businesses in the book are vegan founded. And I very much wanted to keep it focused on business and marketing stories. But I hope that gives you a little bit of a glimmer of hope that the vegans out there who are running businesses and who are doing it for the right reasons. Like, this is our activism. I don't go out and I protest, in front of slaughterhouses. That's just not my personal jam. My activism is through business. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote this book.
Do you think spiritually aware or conscious people respond differently to the different approaches in marketing or styles of marketing?
I think that's a personal question, because there's so many people in the world who are spiritual. Ask them what resonates.
Let's
with
not
them
do
in
spiritual
terms of,
then.
Yeah.
Let's go conscious. Let's use the word conscious, because spiritual immediately does indicate some sort of path. And that's really not what I mean.
Okay.
To me, consciousness is that there's an awareness of just a greater awareness, transpersonal. That's the word I want to use. So beyond the personal, people who have a consciousness that there's more than just me. So they have an awareness of a greater awareness of the whole. Do you think they respond? Could there be a pattern? Has anyone even looked at or thought about maybe they don't respond to traditional marketing specifically? Do you know what I'm asking or no?
I think so. Like healthy skepticism, is that sort of where we're going? Like,
no, I was going to authenticity versus trying to be sold something. Like I have an opinion, I guess, that as I ask this question. So to me, the things that could have worked 20 years ago, or certainly in the 50s, what would have worked to sell eggs was a happy, cheery family. Like, it's advertising, it's marketing. This is part of the strategy, is this image of what you're presenting, what the brand is. And it seems to me that as people become more and more conscious, the brand, if I can use that word, knowing nothing about marketing, is authenticity. So that already is a pattern that's different than it would have been before. Like before, that wasn't a trend necessarily in marketing in the 50s or the 60s or 70s, even be real. And now it's like you can spot it a mile away if somebody's selling you a used car with a big grin, right? That's kind of what I meant. If you saw a connection in your work with people who are conscious and what is impactful for them versus in the past and the strategies that were effective in the past.
Yeah, I think, yes, absolutely. The number of conscious consumers, I think, is growing every day. I think that those who we might not define as conscious consumers need to do a lot more work because a lot of these harmful corporations are still putting out the same messages they did in the 1950s, and nobody knows the difference. Right. If you're looking at my world and the vegans versus animal ag, you still get a ton more ads for meat and dairy than otherwise. However, if you're a conscious consumer and you know the effects of animal ags, it's not necessarily the best choice, the best type of food for your health. That they're deceiving consumers when they say you need milk for strong bones, and it's actually the opposite. Then once you know the truth, then you start being more, like I said before, skeptical of these sort of ads that come your way, and that they're paid for. And so I think the struggle is real for what we call either vegan businesses or conscious businesses, but that's why education is so important. Like, I'm a huge documentary consumer, and that's again a lot of the tools that have helped me on the path to becoming vegan and staying on this path. But I think the average person, the average consumer, needs to be more open to this information and retain it, so that the next time this, greenwashing or just a dissuasive ad comes their way, they know that there's a difference.
Do you have some specifics on, let's do greenwashing and let's talk labels, because there are a lot of products out there that are vegan that are still not ethical and not sustainable, like palm oil, right? It's wreaking havoc in the world, and it's vegan. So how does a consumer, become conscious and learn to discern what is actually good for them and the planet? by looking at like what's a good indicator on labels or in the marketing strategies that they see?
Yeah, and I think that's where the messaging on behalf of companies. So, for example, the company who says we don't use palm oil, you may want to, yeah, and you do have to be skeptical of that, because can I believe that this company is saying what they're saying? So you got to dig deeper. You got to direct message them. You got to email them, because even if it says that on the label, yeah, you can't always trust them. I mean, the labels that you can probably trust the most are the ones that are certified, the ones that have an actual assessment behind them that the company has to go through and fill out and actually pay for in order to put that on their package. But yeah, you're absolutely right. If a company says plant-based or vegan, like just without a certification, there's no regulatory body that can come after them and for misleading the public. And so yeah, even things like that, you got to dig deeper as a consumer.
There really is. There's no regulatory body, even with seafood, in terms of how it's caught and stuff. There's no one checking it. You can just put that little thing there. Yeah.
I'm so sorry to say this, but ocean wise, no, there's nobody checking in on them. So.
Well, I have a question, just in regards, if I may, when we talk, because this is all, we're talking marketing as well. And I always think it's fascinating, because I agree with what you say about milk and meat and disease and all of those things. But how do we get a strong marketing message out there that more people can see in a better way? Like when you take a look at mainstream media and mainstream advertising and marketing, it's not geared towards vegetarianism to veganism. It's all geared on mass consumption. So how do we educate more people in a better way through marketing of all of these things that you're talking about? Because I think it's important for people to know, especially the dairy thing. That's just a great example of misinformation. Yep. And we see censorship over the pandemic just when it came down to good health. So how do we get that message across in a good way that makes an impact, that they understand?
Well, yeah, my answer to that is companies need to be smarter with their messaging. They don't necessarily need to go the route of competing with these large corporations, because number one, it's a ton of money, and number two, all it is an awareness battle. And so I actually invited a lot of bigger vegan companies to contribute to this book. None of them did. And so my book is actually a guide and a collection of stories of small to medium-sized businesses. And the interesting thing about them is the two longest chapters in my book are public relations and digital marketing. So that just tells you those are the top two strategies that they're using. So digital marketing, your social media, your website, your email, your blogs, videos. These are all very low cost tactics. And then second, public relations. So that could be going through the media, it could be going through influencers, or it could be creating their own media. So that's what a lot of them are doing, creating their own podcasts, putting out their own books. And to me, again, that tells me their companies are being very scrappy with their time and their budget, because they know they can't compete on advertising, even though I do talk about advertising in the book anyway. So that's the sense that I get from having written this book, is that they're using the tools at their disposal. And when you talk about, and then as we said in the beginning, it's really up to them how much of the education and the activism they want to put into their marketing messaging. Some are going to be a lot stronger in that vein than others. And when they are talking about this kind of messaging, it helps to have studies and other reliable sources to back it up. And that's how we hopefully reach the more conscious consumers. Because without that, then you're just doing the same thing that the animal ag company is doing, right? And then it's again up to the consumer to figure out who's right, because they're both saying different opposing things. So that's what I am seeing. A lot of the vegan businesses are using the evidence. And I talk about, so for example, nutritionfacts.org has been around for quite a long time, founded by Dr. Michael Greger, not a vegan business, but the whole point of their platform is to share studies about what, is good for people's health. And, the majority of the studies that they're sharing are in favor of a plant-based diet. So
that would be a great link to add to our page when we put this up, Mark. What is it?
Nutritionfacts.org.
That would be great.
It's based in America, but they've been putting out content in multiple languages. There's at least 3 or 4 languages that they're putting content out in, which is also amazing because not everybody speaks English. So they're reaching another potential audience with this information.
So I want to get your take on Maple Leaf Foods. They invested so much in jacking up the plant-based part of their corporation, and it was massive, and they took a tumble. They just, it all fell apart. So in terms of meat alternatives, I'm wondering if there's anything we can learn from that, or entrepreneurs can learn from it. Like, what's the moral of that story? I found it a bit sad, really. Like, here was a big corporation saying, okay, plant-based, let's go. And it did not make them money. What's your take on all that?
Well, actually, related to that, about 2 weeks ago, there have been 1 or 2 articles in quite major American newspaper outlets that were talking about the demise of plant-based meat companies. So yeah, they're based on what was happening in not just in Maple Leaf Foods, but other like Beyond Meat, for example, has declined in its stock. They're only putting that out because they see us coming.
Wait a minute. What do you mean? Who's putting what out? Like Maple Leaf lost money. So when you say they're putting what out, who are we?
Well, these articles saying that, this growth of plant-based that everybody has been talking about isn't actually happening. It's actually declining. The reason for that is because there have been so many companies, big and small, that have been putting out these alternatives that now the market is saturated and now everybody can't win. This is, of course, my opinion, but I think that's what's happened. It's you can't have both Beyond Meat and Maple Leaf and all of these local-based, meat alternatives all succeeding at once. There's just not enough people, I think, converting to the plant-based diet to be able to keep up with that growth that they are hoping for. That being said, I'm not saying that the number of vegans or people going plant-based is declining. It is actually growing. I think it's just a market thing, and in that, there's been too much saturation. That's
interesting.
My opinion.
So I hadn't thought about the saturation part, but what I thought about is our drive to recreate the look and taste of meat part of this saturation, meaning, okay, there's too many burgers that all look like burgers that are beyond burgers, but they're all looking plant-based burgers, as opposed to inspiring people creatively to eat in a new way that is plant-based, that just rocks your world. You look at anything that looks like melted cheese seems to be appealing to people. Surely there's something that can have that caramelized vibe that has nothing to do with looking like an old, a food that's already in existence. Like, is it that we're not reimagining how healthy eating could look and make it appealing? Like, is that the missing piece there?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Like, the plant-based burgers have been around for quite some time. There is not that there's there's always room for people to put out new products, but you can't have a million companies putting out the same patty, even if they're different recipes. I think you hit it right there. We need, if we want people to move more on the spectrum, we need to offer products that they would substitute instead of instead of so for a long time people have not found that melty cheese. Daya locally has tried. I don't think it's quite popular yet in terms of the pizza, but like I pay attention to all the news outlets and the products that are coming out, and I think there are only a few maybe in North America that have really made that melty cheese effect happen. It's but that being said, there's tons and tons of innovations happening. We haven't even talked about cultured meat yet. That's a whole other episode, probably.
No, I want to ask you about that, because I don't know anybody who can read about that and not kind of go, oh my God. Like, I don't know. Does it gross you out? It grosses me out. I get kind of weirded out. Not you? You like it?
I mean, I used to eat meat, and so something that looks like meat isn't going to gross me out. And it's not
being
for me.
Cultivated though,
it's not for me, because the funny thing is, it's those of us who've already gone vegan, we already know we can do without animal products. So why would we go back and then now actually eat the animals again, just without the cruelty? No judgment on anybody who chooses to do that, but it's just not for me, because I've already learned this way of living. So I'm not going to go back to the animal.
But if you're trying to get people off meat, you're offering that as a pathway, to me, is not particularly appealing or pleasant to meat eaters. To now we're going to create it. What do you think, Mark?
We'll see.
I can see you've got a reaction.
We'll see. We'll see what the market says when these products start coming out. So
if I'm going to eat meat, I prefer, if it's a choice, it's like, wild, raised well, all of those kinds of things. So fake meat, to me, Tasha, like what you're talking about, I'm the same. It creeps me out, because it's not even alive at some point.
Yeah.
And what I think, and part of me is just kind of wants to comment in terms of, some food for thought, because what I think is fascinating when I hear you talking about, plant-based patties or burgers, and it's the meaning that we give things. For one, like a burger is a meat patty, so we start changing our language because we're conditioned to have these burgers, to have this meat, to have these things as a conditioned thing. So we're looking to replicate it in a natural form or a plant-based form. And why don't we just eat plants and raw foods and natural foods in its natural source, instead of creating these things that we've been conditioned to consume for decades and decades, depending on your years of age? Because to me, it always floors me that all of a sudden they make these veggie patties or vegan patties, and then you look at everything else that's in them, and they're full of chemicals, or full of binders, or full of all sorts of crap, but it's marketed as a vegan or a plant-based or whatever that is. And if you're really serious, in my opinion, you would just go to eating, clean, raw, more natural foods anyways, versus trying to get a cheesy non-cheese that melts the way you like. It's a weird way of thinking.
It is. And I 100% agree with you. And I think people will always go for quick and easy. They're working long hours. The kids are hungry. And so I'm with you, Mark. And I also want to be moderate in saying, let's shift the consciousness away from meat, but let's get inventive in what could be. I think we're almost not wired, but programmed to see certain things as comfort food. And I don't have any problem if it's natural and there's no preservatives, doing that without trying to mimic any meat-based anything. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think it's possible. So when I mentioned the cheese, you could say, well, that's mimicking. But what if it was made, I'm making this up because I'm sure you can't, but if it was made from hemp and you gave it a brand new name and it had a nutty caramelized flavor and it was called Hemp Hits, I don't know. But people would acclimatize to that. Your kids would eventually be going, hey, we want some Hemp Hits.
And Mark touched on an important point about language. So we've called burgers, the meat of it, patties. Really, it's cow, it's beef. So, we've actually come up with these words so that we don't actually have to say the name of the animal that it's made of. Bacon, that's actually pig. Pork, that's actually pig. So if we want to really get down to the language, that's what we should be saying to kids. Like, this is the food that I'm putting in front of you. Whereas if you say cheese, everybody, of course, is going to think dairy, but it's absolutely possible to have the exact same process. I mean, I've got examples in the book of real cheesemakers that are just making cheese out of plants. And so cheese is one of those words that, I mean, in the US, they're suing companies for using these words because they want the animal version to stay in the mainstream when, there's these little companies that are putting out alternatives. Why can't we call it a milk as well? A plant-based milk, a plant-based cheese. Right. And so, I mean, we can go into the whole origin of language, but yeah.
Well, I think from a marketing perspective, and what I think people really need to know, and this is part of, expanding our consciousness too, is how in marketing and advertising, we are being duped, and people are competing, whether conscious or unconscious, they're competing for our attention, and we're being conditioned into these ways of thinking, being, doing, and most importantly, consuming. Mm-hmm. And when you start becoming aware of that, I think, Tasha, you were mentioning earlier, is like, when you can see a used car salesman coming, or, you start seeing that, it becomes much more aware, where some people aren't at that place where they're seeing what's happening just in commercials and advertising, and everything that's being put in front of them is all designed to get them to consume things that, truth be told, most people don't need. That's why we're this mass consumer generation on generation that is just mass consuming, throwing shit away, disposable, all over the place, filling landfills, all for what? For money, for survival, for all of these things. So the education behind marketing and advertising and this attention to things, like when you realize the rat race and the hamster wheel we're on, it's really an eye-opener.
And it's not just things. So when you look at influencers, what are they influencing you to do, think, say, feel? And so whether it's a thing or it's an image, this whole, what you look like, and the whole, actually, I'd love to get your take on what is going on in this social media scene, and where's it going? Because I find it fits with what you're saying, Mark. It's like to me, it's all manipulation. And if there isn't consciousness, then what is your intent? And it's for personal gratification 9.9.99999 times out of, there's this tiny little group of people somewhere, I guess, who are trying to get something out there that's positive, but mostly it's self-gratifying. That's how I see it. Sandra, how do you see it?
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. I mean, I'm a consumer. I have to, we all need to eat. We all need to wear clothes. That being said, in my adult life, I've started to move as much toward minimalism as possible. I, for the most part, eat a whole food plant-based diet. That's also the cheapest way to eat, for those of you out there who might want to save money. I will only get the processed product if I have to, if it adds to my meal. We have an abundance of great restaurants here in Vancouver to choose from. So of course, I'm always going to be choosing from the vegan menu. But yeah, I mean, the world is run by companies. And so my take is, if I got to be a consumer, I'm going to, as Mark said, consume as little as I can. And when I do buy, I put my dollars into either locally owned businesses or the ones that align with my values. And that's going to be vegan. It's going to be sustainable if possible. It's hard to get those two things, both of those things. But yeah, that's all I can say is you got to choose the companies that align with your values as much as you can.
I think we all need to wake up just a tad more.
And imagine when you consciously choose where and how you spend your money, you're voting for what you want, in the moment and for the future of the world. When if everybody all of a sudden stopped consuming gas because they believed an electric vehicle was better, right? You know, all of a sudden your money's going to different places, and it starts shifting the whole scope of our society and business and even infrastructure. Because we're talking about, when you talk about the dairy industry, the meat industry, look what happened with Oprah years ago, when she spoke out against, you know, farmed beef and things like that. But I still think there needs to be that awareness, and education needs to really change its way so that we're teaching people, I think, a more natural way of life versus, you know, this being conditioned into consumerism.
And I also want to say, each of us as a consumer, we have power. You know, if you're on social media, you know, whoever is in your circle, it's on us to share this information. Once we learn it, we digest it, we're acting upon it, share it, because because your loved one may not be watching TV, they might not be on social media, so they might not be aware of the advertising that wants to come at them. But if they're in touch with you, and if they trust you as a consumer, that's how we start to change things. So it's yes, we're bombarded by messages every day by these companies, but we can also teach each other.
And your book, Vegan Marketing Success Stories, which shares stories, like literal stories, right, of business owners. What do you think, what would could an entrepreneur learn by reading this book?
So any entrepreneur or marketer can pick this book up and learn how to form a marketing strategy. I really wanted to make this a very practical guide. This is my covert way of getting veganism out there. We welcome everybody, you know what I mean, wherever you are on the spectrum. So number one, it's a practical guide to marketing. If you're new to business, or if you're new to marketing, the examples in the book just happen to be of vegan businesses. So there are 47 contributors to the book from all around the world, mostly in North America and Europe. And then because I found that there were some gaps in the examples or gaps in the tactics that I talk about. So especially some of the old school tactics, I wanted at least one example of a vegan business for the tactic that I talked about. And so I just had to go online and find examples. So there are another about 36 examples that did not contribute their story, but that I found online and then got their permission to include in the book. So in total, there's about 80 vegan businesses whose stories or examples that I share in my book to support the information about how to form a marketing strategy for your business.
Can you give our listeners some of the key components that you think are invaluable in forming a marketing strategy?
Well, I'll give you a rundown of the chapters, and that gives you a good idea of the flow of the book. So chapter 1 is marketing basics. I wasn't actually going to include that, but because of the stories that I got in, I found that things like how to name your company, how to choose your title, things like that had quite a bit of effect on the company's marketing. How much to include veganism in your business, or the messaging of that. And so first chapter is marketing basics. Second chapter is advertising and direct marketing. So more of that old school. Chapter 3 is sales promotions. Chapter 4 is public relations. Chapter 5 is digital marketing. Those are the two biggest chapters. Chapter 6 is events and direct selling. So a lot of the face-to-face type of marketing. And then the last chapter is called everything else. It just includes sections that were not long enough to form their own chapters. But I include in that chapter, I include how companies marketed during the pandemic, how they pivoted, a section on the importance of diversity and inclusion, which I'm really proud of, and a section on companies that transitioned to become vegan and how they marketed that story. So that's a rundown of what you learn in the book.
Can you maybe grab a couple of points out of digital marketing? Because I think, in today's world, that's where people immediately go. Are there some key components that you think have shown themselves to be very effective in digital marketing?
I mean, social media is probably number one. That's the longest section in the book. Of course, it depends where your audience is, which platform you're going to use. But I would say, like two of the of the examples that really stand out. Both Midday Squares, which I mentioned before, it's a company in Montreal that sells plant-based functional chocolate bars. They use their platform like quite with transparency. That's what I want to say. So their second hire on their operations side was a videographer. They hired a videographer even before they hired a salesperson, because they knew that documenting their journey was going to be a huge part of their marketing strategy. And you can see that in their content. I would say they're the biggest on Instagram. They're everywhere else as well. But the Instagram just really gives you a behind the scenes look at everything that's happening in the company. And they are, I say transparent because they're not shy in terms of sharing their successes as well as their failures, their wins and their losses, all of the ups and downs that go with running a business. They're just really excellent at doing that. And then Kelly Bennett, who's a creative director out in New York City. She's a solopreneur, but works with quite a few brands. And that's her strategy as well, is she uses a lot of Instagram stories and reels and just shows people behind the scenes what's going on with her and her business. That's sort of like, I hate to say reality show style, but as much of content as you can share about what's happening with your business, what's happening in your life, even.
Yeah. Yeah. And to me, that's for me, that is one I would respond to, like actually somebody being real about what's going on in there, as opposed to a painted picture of a fantastic, image, that they're actually being real about it. I find that I can relate, when it's something like that. Are you having trouble with your visual there?
Yes, I'm so sorry. I've lost your sound, but I've got you back.
Oh, okay, good.
Sorry, if you could just repeat that.
I was just saying that strategy that you just described for me is meaningful. I relate to it. Whereas other ones where it is, it may be creative, but it's, target. I don't like the word. I don't want to be anybody's target. I don't want to be a target audience. I want someone to be exactly what you said, transparent, and to feel my own autonomy, that I can step up as a conscious consumer and decide, is this for me or not? So that kind of marketing would work. What do you think is the difference between an influencer and an expert?
Ooh, what a great question. An influencer is popular. I would say that's that's what distinguishes them the most. The expert might be full of knowledge, but maybe doesn't have a huge following, and that's the only difference. But I think we need to be trusting more experts than we do influencers. That's for sure.
So, what makes a person an expert?
If they have a good body of knowledge about a certain subject, and they're also trustworthy, so they're not sharing misinformation. Right. They can show reliable sources behind the information they're sharing. And they're inspiring and doing it in a positive way versus maybe for their own gain.
Do you think it is possible to marry altruistic desire to make this a better planet and capitalism and making money?
I think so. So before I started this business, I was my agency, Conscious PR. We certified as a B Corp, 1% for the Planet member. I did all those things, not just to be a good company, but to try and roll in those same circles and learn from other companies who are doing the same. And what I learned was, until we learn to remove animals from our businesses as well, there's a huge gap there. And so I think, that's where my expertise here with veganism comes in. And I think even those companies that, like the Patagonias of the world, that are doing amazing things, can still learn and still take more steps forward in terms of positive impact, because we need everybody. We need everybody moving in that forward direction, because there's too many corporations that are pulling us behind. So.
Mm-hmm. Anything you want to share? We're in our final minutes of just what's going on in the whole vegan industry and the scene, either in Vancouver or Canada or globally. Anything that is important you feel to share with the listeners that they might not know?
Yes, I mean, if this conversation has sparked something at all within you and you're interested in about learning about veganism, there's so many resources. I've pulled together my own list that has helped me along my journey. That's up on my website, sandranomoto.com, on my list love page, and just scroll down to the plant-based vegan section. That's where you'll find it. Because there's so many resources I could share with you that we don't have time for, but we need you. We need you. Everyone who is still consuming animal products in any form. We need you on the path. And it really is the most ethical and compassionate lifestyle you can live. So or even if you run a business and it's not vegan, that can have a huge impact as well. So that's your call.
I know we're going to put your website up on our page as well, which is consciouslivingradio.org. And
it's already there.
It's already there, Mark, because you're so good at this.
Sometimes I get my timing right.
I'm curious, do you think there are unique issues facing women entrepreneurs? I know I'm opening up a topic again. I should be closing it, but I'm just curious your take on that.
Absolutely. I mean, if you just look at the amount of funding that is still that goes to women, I think it's still a paltry 5% compared to men. And then the stats for women of color or other non-binary entrepreneurs are even less. And so absolutely we need more women leading vegan or non-vegan businesses for sure.
What's our time, Mark?
Well, we've got a few more minutes if there's anywhere else you want to go.
Well, I want to play a game, but that's me. I was thinking I could start a couple of sentences and you finish them. So it's almost like
lightning
stream of
round
consciousness, like that. Yep. Okay. Most people would be surprised to know that
I once played at Rogers Arena in high school in front of an audience of high school students, about 4,000.
What did you do?
I was in a band with my friends. I played bass, and we performed a few songs at a youth day event.
Cool. The best advice I ever received is?
Ooh. I can't name anybody who's told me this, but I've heard it from many sources. Just get help. If you're running a business, get help, get support. That's the best way to thrive.
The one thing I wish someone had told me is
where my food comes from, especially the animal related foods and how they're made.
If you're really serious about success,
be authentic and share your story as much as you can.
I'm most grateful for
my family and friends.
Okay, last one. If I gave you a magic wand, which we like to do on this show a lot, and you waved it and you could change the world would
be getting its source of food from plants instead of animals.
And can I add, be kind to all animals? I just find it's so painful. And of course, my algorithm is it's nothing but rescues and rescue after rescue. And it's just so hard because, it's a global epidemic of the way humans treat animals. And it's connected to consuming, but it's also connected to just how we relate to other living things. Kind of back to the very first thing that we opened with, which is your knowing, my knowing, Mark's knowing that we're all connected and deserve a kind, compassionate, considerate relationship with each other. Yeah.
Well said.
Mark, any last thoughts before we wrap it up?
Oh, I've got lots of last thoughts, but that's okay. I just think it's really important that people aware that there are other options. And I agree in terms of the humane treatment of all life, right? Mm-hmm. All life, plants, animals, everything. And really learn a bit about marketing, because you'd be surprised at how we are being influenced and manipulated on an unconscious level through mainstream media advertising. And I think that if everybody knew a little bit more about that, they could have more personal power in making more conscious decisions about what they choose to consume, buy, purchase, and do.
Thanks for joining us today. You've been listening to Conscious Living Radio. We've been speaking with Sandra Nomoto about her book, Vegan Marketing Success Stories. All the links on our page, consciouslivingradio.org. And the show will air Wednesday, 100.5 FM